All right, let's uncover a secret history. It's the story of two massive ideas in software development, Waterfall and DevOps. And here's the thing, one was basically born from the other's biggest, most misunderstood secret. I'm serious, a lot of what we think we know about this whole story is just plain wrong. Okay, let's get into it.
So first up, we've got the waterfall model. And at first glance, it makes perfect sense, right? It's this very linear, step-by-step approach. You finish one phase completely before you even think about starting the next. It's a lot like building a house. You pour the foundation, then you build the walls, then you put on the roof. It feels so intuitive, and yeah, for decades it was the standard. But there is a huge twist to this story.
And here it is. The man who first wrote about this model, Dr. Winston W. Royce, said in the exact same paper that this process was, and I'm quoting here, risky and invites failure. Just let that sink in for a second. The guy who's seen as the father of Waterfall told everyone from day one that the pure version of his idea was basically a recipe for disaster. So what on earth happened? How did we get here? Well, that question brings us right to the heart of the great myth of the Waterfall model. How did a process that its own author called out as deeply flawed become the absolute unquestioned standard in software for so long? The answer, it turns out, is a pretty fascinating mix of a huge misunderstanding and a little bit of historical accident. First, let's just quickly break down the process itself. You start with requirements, you get everything signed off in blood. Then you move on to design. Once that's locked in, you actually write the code. After that, you test the whole thing. At the very end, you deploy it, and then finally, you're in maintenance mode. Each step just cascades down to the next, like a real waterfall. And here's the key, there is no going back up. So here's how this massive misunderstanding really took hold. First, and this is wild, Dr. Royce never even used the word waterfall, not once. He actually presented the diagram as a kind of broken example, a model that he said needed a ton of feedback loops to actually work. But, people loved how simple the diagram looked. They completely ignored all his warnings, and this simple, broken model became the standard, especially after the US Department of Defense started using it. So Royce saw the danger right from the beginning. And over the years, people working in the trenches discovered what we can call the 7 fundamental cracks in the waterfall foundation. And these aren't just minor little issues. We're talking deep structural problems that almost guarantee projects will fail. All right, let's dig into these crooks. Problem number 1 is late feedback. I want you to just imagine this. You spend an entire year building something, only to find out in the last couple of weeks that you totally misunderstood a critical requirement from the start. That is the first giant flaw. Any feedback comes way too late when fixing the problem is this slow, incredibly expensive nightmare. And that leads us right into the next problem, these massive big bang releases. You're bundling months, maybe even years of work and deploying it all at once. The potential blast radius is just enormous. One little mistake can bring the entire system down, and then good luck trying to figure out which one of the thousands of changes was the one that broke everything. And the whole process is just so brittle because of these rigid phase gates. Requirements get frozen in place, designs are locked down. But we all know that in the real world, things change. The market changes, customers change their minds. Waterfall is basically designed to fight against reality, which makes it painfully slow and bureaucratic to adapt to any new information. Now, beyond just the flawed process, it creates huge problems between people. Have you ever been in a situation where one team builds a thing and then just kind of chucks it over a wall to another team to run? Well, that's problem number 4, dev and ops silos. It creates this really toxic us versus them culture, where nobody takes ownership and everyone is just pointing fingers when something goes wrong. And all of that leads to this absolute mess of manual, error-prone operations. Deployments are done by hand, following some checklist that might be out of date. Critical fixes depend on the memory of that one person who's been there forever. It's just not reliable. It's not repeatable, and all that critical knowledge is constantly at risk of just walking right out the door. So what do you get when you combine a flawed process and divided teams? Pretty much a disaster. When things inevitably break, and they always do, recovery is painfully slow. A lot of the time, it's your customers who are calling you to tell you your service is down, and then it's this all-hands-on-deck fire drill that can take hours or sometimes even days to fix. And maybe the most absurd part of this whole thing, success isn't even measured by whether the product works or if customers actually like it. No, it's measured by paperwork and getting sign-offs. I mean, think about that.
you can follow the process perfectly, check every single box, and still build a product that is a complete and total failure in the eyes of your users.
So, with all of these deep, fundamental problems, it was pretty obvious that something had to give. And this is where DevOps enters the picture. And this is so important to get. DevOps isn't just another buzzword or some new set of tools. It's a philosophy. It's a cultural shift that was designed as a direct answer to every single one of those 7 cracks we just talked about.
So remember that cripplingly late feedback? DevOps just demolishes that problem. Instead of waited for months, things like continuous integration and automated testing give developers feedback in minutes. You know, almost instantly if a change you just made broke something, back when it's super cheap and easy to fix.
And what about those terrifying big bang releases? DevOps completely flips the script. Instead of one massive, high-risk deployment every 6 months, you do hundreds of tiny, low-risk deployments, maybe even every day. It makes change a normal, boring, manageable part of the job, not some catastrophic event to be feared. And those rigid gates that just stifled any kind of innovation, they're gone. DevOps embraces iterative delivery. By automating the entire path to production, change becomes a routine, safe, everyday process. The system can actually evolve and adapt right alongside the needs of the business, as it should.
And now we get to the huge cultural shift. DevOps tears down those walls with a powerful and simple new mindset. You build it, you run it. Small, focused teams own their service from the first line of code all the way to production. Suddenly, the blame game just disappears, and a sense of shared ownership takes over. To fix all those manual, error-prone operations, the DevOps answer is simple but incredibly powerful. Automate everything. By treating your infrastructure just like software, we call it infrastructure as code. You build reliable, repeatable systems that don't depend on one person's fuzzy memory. It's consistency by design.
And what about that slow, painful recovery from failure? DevOps makes teams proactive instead of constantly being reactive. With deep monitoring and automated alerts, you can often detect and even fix problems before a single customer ever notices anything is wrong. For reliability, that's an absolute game changer.
And finally, DevOps completely changes the definition of what success even means. Forget the paperwork. Success is now measured by metrics that actually deliver value to your customers. How fast can we get a new idea into their hands? How quickly can we restore service when it goes down? It's all about the actual outcome, not just following the process.
So when you put all of this together, you start to realize it's not just about doing things a little bit differently. No, it's a fundamental shift in how we think about the very nature of risk and change. There's really one core idea that explains the entire difference between these two worlds.
And here it is. This is the crucial point, the one idea that explains everything we've talked about. Waterfall tries to manage risk by preventing change. It locks everything down, hoping nothing breaks. DevOps takes the exact opposite approach. It accepts that change is a constant, necessary thing, so it manages risk by making change safe. That's it. That one shift in thinking is the entire revolution.
And that leaves us with one final question to ponder, because this idea is so much bigger than just software. In your work, maybe even in your life, where are you trying to manage risk by preventing change? When the real breakthrough, the real innovation, might come from figuring out how to make change safe instead. It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining this explainer.